Hello, my name is Larry Tatum, and welcome to my tape on foot maneuvers. I'm going to teach you how to get to and from your opponent, and beyond that, teach you how to use your foot maneuvers as weapons. All right, now we're going to move out of our stances. We're going to go into foot maneuvers. And if your stances are legible, like we talked earlier, then you're ready for foot maneuvers. Now, foot maneuvers is not as easy as it would sound, moving from one place to another. Because as you're striking, whether it be with your hands or feet, your feet always dictate where your strikes are going to land, where they're going to end up. Okay, your legs do that. So as we go through the foot maneuvers, I want you to remember that. It's very important. And if you have trouble with them, review the tape, review the basic stance tape before you get into this. All right, first maneuver I'm going to work with is called a step through. We're going to do a step through forward and a step through reverse. I'm going to give you two versions of it. I want you to learn them both because they both have their value. Okay? You got to remember that every move has a consequence. And if you know that, then you know when to use that particular move. And we'll get into this as we go on to other tapes as well. Now let's start from a right neutral bow. That means that my right leg is forward. My weight is evenly distributed on my feet. The depth is what? It's knee to heel. The width is determined by toe to heel. My feet are on a 45-degree angle, and my shoulders also follow that angle. So now we want to maneuver from this stance, but not really lose it. So if I want to maneuver forward, I open my foot and I step through. But what am I stepping through? Through what? Well, if you analyze it, you take a look at your front foot and your front guard. It's like that you're a fortress. And I did a tape in a castle in England where I compared our body to that castle as a fortress. And in essence, this is what it is a fortress. You have your first line of defense, or your wall of defense, as the name of that tape was. But this is my first line of defense. And if I decide to step through it, that's what I'm stepping through, and I'm offering a new line of defense. Or if I step through in reverse. All right, now, using a step through means that I'm going to pivot on my front foot first, and then later it's going to be simultaneously with my rear foot stepping. But right now we're going to break it up. You pivot on the ball of your front foot. Then you step through. It's as simple as that. And you end up into a new neutral bow. In this case, we went from a right to a left neutral bow. In reverse, I move my front foot back and pivot, not on the ball, but on the heel. All right? Now, you say, well, it seems easier to learn it by pivoting on the heel and then going forward. All right, now I'm going to show you why I want you to pivot on the ball. Mr. George, would you step up, please? And give me a left neutral bow. Now I'm going to have Mr. George give me a straight right punch. That's what we'll use to deal with. And as he punches, I want his front foot on this little crack here in the floor. Go ahead and move up there. So that'll be our point of reference. Now, as he steps through and punches me, I'm going to step back into a right neutral bow and use a right inward block. All right? So as he punches, I'm going to pivot to that neutral bow, but I'm going to pivot on the ball of my foot. Go ahead. Now, as you notice, there's two conflicting motions at this point. The upper part of my body wants to go in this direction to block the punch. The lower half, pivoting on the ball, throws my hip and energy in that direction. It'll work, but I'm competing with myself, and you'll notice that I'm wide open, go ahead, for a kick from that position. Now, we go back to the same point of reference. If he shoots the same punch, and I pivoted on my heel, both top and lower half of the body are what? They're moving in unison, they're moving together in the same direction. So we have complete body focus on this block. And it also closes me up for that kick. It doesn't leave me open. It closes that kick. Now, if you make this a habit now, when we get into sparring, tournament fighting, and so forth, street defense, that is imperative. It's imperative now that you learn this. You watch again. Watch how I pivot back when I make that block. That heel, the toes pivot in towards that direction. Thank you. Now, I said that is true when you're going back. When you're going forward, I said, well, now you don't want to pivot on your heel. I think you can see what I'm going to show you next, Mr. George. Can I show him again? Left neutral bow. If I decided to move into Ernie at this point and I pivoted on the heel to do a forward step through, what am I opening? I'm opening my groin again. All right? But if I pivoted on the ball, what's happening? I'm closing off that groin area as I'm stepping through. Rather than suddenly opening it up, I'm closing it off. Only the very adept will purposely do this as a ploy to get the guy to move. But don't do it unless you know what you're doing. When you go forward through your step throughs, you pivot on the ball. Thank you, Jimmy. Now, if you look at it, when I do it, I'm going to drop my hands. I'm in my neutral bow, a left neutral bow. I pivot on the what? The heel? No, I pivot on the ball. I step through, but I keep the small of my back tucked in, and that forces my rear end to what? Move with me and move underneath me. And you watch it again. This is my step through. It's as simple as that. When I go in reverse, I step back and I pivot. I pivot on the heel. As you get better, it actually turns more to the center of the foot, but we're going to use the heel right now. Okay, now with the help of Ernie, I'll show you how these step throughs are used, particularly if we're advancing and one is retreating. As I go forward, and again, or if he comes after me, I make sure that I'm covered now. Remember, when I turn back, I pivot on the heel. If he keeps advancing, again, I cover for that knee. And this is how you pivot when you're in these step throughs, whether going forward or reverse. Thank you, Ernie. Now, that's one method of doing it, and that is considered the more modern method used today. And you'll notice that as I step through, it's a straight line that I move on. Now, in the earlier years of Kenpo, particularly in America, we used to use, and we still do, depending upon the situation, but it was primarily taught to come into the foot and out. All right, it's become a little more obsolete, but again, it's still used, and I want you to learn it for the simple reason is, Mr. George, sometimes if a guy's particularly good with his feet, you don't want to come straight across and leave yourself open as you're moving in through a step through. So you may purposely want to close off your groin area. And even if you do take a hit, let me have your foot. Let me have your foot. It's not going to hit the groin. It's going to hit the lower part of your stomach. But the groin is pinched off, literally pinched off. And you can weather a strike like that. I don't advise it, but it can be done. Now, if you step straight through, as we learned earlier, you're going to get there sooner, particularly with this type of strike. Whereas if you came in now, you're going to get there later. But that has a contradiction because I may purposely want to go around as lead hand. So I'm going to come into my foot, pinch myself off, particularly if I don't have a hand to protect myself, and come around it and make my strike. But you notice how I was pinched off when I came in. Now we're going to get into this pinching off later because it's extremely important. Particularly when your back is turned and you do a reverse step through, you can't leave that gap open. There's going to be a time where you're going to have to pinch it off so he can't kick up between your legs. You don't always have the option to block with your hands. You're going to have to maybe even block with your butt. It depends. But so we're going to learn, thank you, Mr. George, how to use that. So that as I begin my step through now, it's going to come in and it's going to make a little curve. Forward and reverse. Now, I want you to remember this too. Whichever step through that you work on, be consistent in your what? This is called from foot to foot. It's not width, that's depth. Width is determined by what? Toe to heel. Depth is determined by knee to heel. And your height is determined by how your knees bent. So whatever step through you're using, make sure that you're consistent in your neutral stances. All right, now we're going to go from step throughs to crossovers. And crossover is a very interesting way of maneuvering. It allows you to be very elusive with your attacker. And it allows you to change your angles of retreat or angles of attack. Now in step throughs, pretty much you're either going forward or you're going in reverse. You can go off to the side. Okay, but generally when we go off to the side, we like to go from a neutral stance into a crossover, because what did I say about pinching off the groin area? It has a tendency of pinching off the groin area, and then you can step out into a neutral again, crossover again, and back to your original position. A forward crossover allows you to advance on your attacker, again pinching off the groin and stepping out. Okay, you can retreat by a rear crossover, okay, whether it be going behind you or a front crossover to the rear in this direction. Combined with step-throughs and sideways, off-angling, you become pretty formidable. All right, now with the help of Rick, I'm going to show you how these crossovers can be applied. Now, particularly in a sparring situation, where if Rick and I were fighting, if Rick shuffled in with a punch, if I crossed over, it would allow me a new angle of attack. It would expose Rick either to a punch from me, a kick, or whatever I wanted to deliver at that time. Now, that's pretty much on a defensive type of situation. If you watch it again, as he came in, I crossed, pinching off the groin, because he may shoot with the left, but it still puts me at a better angle. All right? So it's good to use in that position. Now, if I decided, guard up, to use the crossover, give it another dimension. Not so much defensive or maneuvering me out of the way, but to using the crossover as a weapon. I could be working with Rick, and I can move in, get close enough to where I can use my foot and use it as a sweep. But now, if you look at this, all that was an exaggerated crossover. And if I decided to keep on stepping out, the stance itself, which is a neutral bow, becomes a weapon. All right, now, there is a point of no return that we use in Kenpo. And you might consider this line straight down between me and Rick. If I go past this line with too much forward momentum, then I better use something like a front crossover. Or if I'm not going to sweep with it, at least use it to minimize my openings and to negate his. Okay. Besides using it in a defensive, but using it in a more offensive situation, we have a point of what's called point of no return. That's a line in front of us. Now, when I did that first maneuver, I stayed back behind the line. So I wasn't really committed to going into finishing my crossover. But if I decide to cross that line of no return, my first sweep is no more than an exaggerated step as I begin to move to sweeping. Then if I keep stepping out, the neutral stance becomes a new weapon. I haven't even used my hands yet, or my legs as kicking, but I'm using my front crossover. Hold it there for a second, Rick. If I retrace my step, it was no more than this. That's all it was. Thank you, Rick. All right, now, if we start from a neutral position, and I decide to cross forward, and I unwind, the moment that I stop that crossover, it's no longer a crossover. It's a what? It's a twist stance, and we learned that earlier. Okay, if I stop it here, it's a twist stance, and then back to my neutral position. The next foot maneuver that I want to go over is called switching, and switching is no more than switching from one side, for instance, from a left neutral bow into a right neutral bow. Now, as you do this, you don't want to gain or lose any distance necessarily, but what you do want to do is to be able to shift from side to side without exposing yourself. Minimize your exposure. The safest way, I'm going to start with that first, is to bring your lead foot back to your back foot. Don't change your height. Then step out with the opposite foot into your neutral position. Now that's the safest. If I step forward first and then back, it's fine for the more adept. But in the beginning, you're stepping right into somebody's action. Mr. George, can I use you on this? I need your help. For instance, I'm fighting Ernie, so I decide to switch my stance. But in switching, I step forward. Well, I'm walking right in to all of this action. And if I'm good enough, I may parry and block it. That's fine. But even so, you don't take unnecessary chances. Even the more adept don't do that. The safest way for me to do it is to step back, then forward. Or you can hop and do it. Hopping's fine, providing you don't get too high off the ground, because the moment you're off the ground, you're very vulnerable, especially if the guy's good at sweeping and using his legs. All right, now let's give another dimension to switching other than just switching side to side. And like I said before, many times when I give an example, I want to give an old example with it. For instance, if I was attempted sweep with the staff and I crossed behind, we're in a twist stance. The switch allowed me to get up above the stick, but also with his fingers wrapped around it. As I stomped it, what happened to his fingers down there? They also got stomped. And then if I move from my twist stance into what? Into a reverse bow, the stance itself becomes a what? A weapon. If I go a little further and I stomp with my heel, I'm in a cat stance. And there's the stances are becoming weapons again. All right, next foot maneuver I want to work on is called shuffling. Basically, there are three types of shuffles. There's a step drag, a drag step, and a push drag. Now, we're going to start with a step drag first. It's the easiest. Basically, it starts from a neutral position. That's what we're going to work from. And it gives us a way of advancing by creeping up to our opponent. We step and drag. And whatever I step with my front foot right now, if it's, say it's 6 inches, then you drag 6 inches. You can go 6 inches and drag all the way up and then step back out. So there's many ways that you can vary it. You look at it from the side view. You step, drag, that's all it is. And you maintain the same depth in your stance, unless you're purposely going up to here for a reason, which I'll show you how we'll use that in a minute. Now that's called a step drag. Step drag forward, step drag in reverse. Okay, now we have a drag step. Okay, this is where you drag your rear foot up and step with the front foot. Or drag your front foot back and step with your back foot. Those are called drag steps. All right, now we have a push drag, which is probably the most common. Now push drag is no more than stepping with the lead foot. And as you do it, you push off with the back foot. And you maintain the same depth, whether you're going forward or back. All right, and this is probably the fastest way to get you to your target. Rick, can I use you in this example here? Good. Put your right neutral bow. If I was far enough from Rick and I wanted to creep up to him, I can step, drag, gradually move back and forth with me. As he moves back, I can kind of creep in just a little bit. If I don't find myself getting there soon enough, I don't want to take too deep of a step, sweep me. Because before I drag that back foot, I may get swept. All right, now, so this is where I'm going to have to switch one of the shuffles. We started with what? A step drag, step drag. Instead of going deeper to get to Rick, I use a drag and then a step. Pop. Add it with a strike or whatever you want to do. All right, now, on my way out, I can use a drag and then a step. A step and then a drag. And break the knee. So we're going to employ this in many ways later on. Now the fastest one, put your guard up, is to use a push drag. And a push drag, like I said, is a step with a push with the back leg. And that allows you to get all of your body to where it should be all at once. Everything arrives there at the same moment, all at once. Okay, that's a push drag. If I'm too close and I'm getting tangled up and I want to get out in a hurry, I push drag. All right, now, I'm going to add another little foot maneuver that I do want you to practice. I call it creeping. In a way that you can creep up on your opponent is no more than what? Little twist stances, maneuvering in and out. Okay, it's for the more adept. And as Rick moves around, you find that you want to tease and break up the action. You use this creeping type of motion. Then you can step in, drag out, push drag, drag step, pop, whatever you need to do. All right, now let's go over hops. We have, well, there's three of them. We have hops, we have leaps, and jumps, and they're not the same. They all serve a different purpose, and the name tells you exactly what they are. Now, if you've been practicing from the previous lesson how to stand on one leg, you're going to see why it was important and why I was so adamant about learning that, because now we're going to learn to hop, and a hop is just that. You're hopping on the same leg. That's a hop, and you've got to be able to learn this, and I'll show you why. Rick, can I use your assistance on this? Give me a right punch over here. Once again, through a right punch, if I happen to use a technique that puts Rick down on the mat, And as I see Rick start to get up, I'm back into this situation. Now, I may begin to step and cross over to get back in, but I'm not close enough to what I want. I may hop, make the sweep, and then pinch it off at that point. What stance am I in? Reversible. Good, thank you, Rick. All right, now let's go into jumps. And how can a jump be used? What is a jump? All right, we know a hop is from on one leg and you stay on that leg. A jump is basically hopping with both feet, forward, backward to side, wherever you want to go. And there's a lot of ways it can be used. For example, Mr. George, if you would start to swing your staff again, if I get not a low sweep, but if I get a sweep, well, yeah, we'll call it low, but not as low as the last one we did. A sweep about as high as my calf muscle, and he begins to sweep. There's where a hop can be used. And of course, everything is open at that point. It's important because people on the street, they'll pick up anything and everything they use. All right, now, I'll give you an example how leap can be used twice in this particular technique. As Rick comes with his punch, bam, as I leap off to hit him, and I shove him on his face. Now, if I want to get over to his side as he starts to get up, and I may have to leap to do that. That's from one leg to the other. Okay, that's a leap, going from one leg to the other. I used it in the beginning, I used it towards the end. All right, the next stance is called a rotating twist stance. Now, we've seen it earlier. We haven't labeled it by name. Basically, whenever we stopped in a crossover, it became a twist stance. All right, but now, from a neutral bow, as earlier we learned a twist stance, but I didn't give you the definition of how it got there. It has two names. It's called a rotating twist stance or an in-place twist stance. In any regard, it's an extremely deceiving stance, but it's very powerful. And you might say, well, how can a stance like that be powerful? I'll give you an example here. Mr. George, if I'm fighting my opponent and I shuffle in and punch him towards his face, but if he checks it and I can't hit here, the twist stance can roll right up on his back leg and break his ankle at this point where my arm keeps him checked. So rather than still try to fight with my hands, immediately I go to another level. And if you can see right here, if I put any more pressure, it's going to break. He'll go down. Now take a look at this twist stance from the side. Follow along with me. Begin it from a neutral position and just rotate. And literally, like I said earlier, screw yourself down into the ground. Keep an erect posture. It's very deceiving. It can help strikes from the hands, but by itself it becomes a tremendous lever. A tremendous lever. To this side, we can go back to the horse. I'm going to go over another maneuver. It's called covers. And when you cover, basically, it's to change direction from front to rear in most cases, or from side to side. But we're going to use it front to rear first. And basically, we're going to do it from a neutral position. If I'm going forward and I'm fighting somebody up here, and if I have an opponent behind me, and if I take my rear leg and slide over and turn into it, that's one way of doing it. I wouldn't advise it unless you have a lot of experience. Even then, be careful with it. The safest way is to take your leading leg, wherever it's facing, slide it over just far enough so that when you pivot, you have a toe-to-heel alignment. But now you're in a right neutral bow facing the opposite direction. And if I want to go back to where I was, I take my leading leg again, slide it over, and pivot back. With the help of Ernie George now, I'll show you how we're going to use this. All right, now, Ernie's facing this direction. I'm his opponent here. But he has somebody behind him. If he uses his rear leg to cover, go ahead. He's walking right into the action. And not only up there, but that's walking into the action too, his groin area. Go back to where it was. If he uses the lead leg, go ahead, then he's covering himself naturally, plus the groin area is not open. So he's moving away from my action rather than moving into it. Go back to where you were. Do it with the back leg. Go back to where you were. Use the front leg. And you decide for yourself which one you want to use in combat. All right, now, as I said, covers generally working forward and backwards, but you got to understand as well they work laterally. And that's if I want to cover to that area, rather than using this leg and opening myself up, I'll use my back leg at this point and cover this way. I can cover by stepping back. Fool around with this. Work it out. See what it offers you. It's important to learn because we're going to be using this later on the other tapes when we get involved in more one fight. When we're fighting 3 or 4 guys, you're going to need this cover. There will be times where I will have you cover with the back leg. Right now I don't want you to. It's not safe at this point. But later on as you become more adept, a cover with the back leg can be used and is used. But right now, cover with the lead leg for the purposes of just switching from a front opponent to a rear opponent. The next foot maneuver is called a C-step. That's a common name for it, but basically it's no more than working on half a circle. And at this point in the tape, I wanted to start discussing the circle a little bit because we're really going to be covering this as we go further along. Wherever I'm standing, where I'm facing is considered 12 o'clock. Behind me is 6, to my right is 3, to my left is 9 o'clock. And we have 45-degree angles with 10 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and 8 o'clock. All right, remember that because I'm going to start referring to this now more often, especially in foot maneuvers, because we're changing so many angles that we've got to have a point of reference. And then at 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock, there's a circle that we're standing in the center of this circle. And this is what we're working around. And a C-step is no more than working half of a circle. All right? Now, it can be used by stepping over with your lead foot and stepping through. But instead of doing a regular step through, it's a wide oval. It's called a C-step. Use it going forward and use it going backwards. It's important because, and in reverse, it can be used. We're going to be using this in a lot of techniques. All right, so Rick, can I use your assistance here? Over here into a left neutral bow. If Rick comes in with a straight right punch and I want to off-angling, I can use the C-step. Okay, now you know me by now if you've been watching these tapes. There's a lot of options that I have open to me. If you watch it again, if I work my hands, I can parry, step in, strike with my hands. If I don't want to use my hands, I can use my C-step and come in with a kick from this angle. All right? There's a lot of options, but it's important that you learn this particular stance. The next foot maneuver is called a figure 8. It's important as well as everything else. It's a little harder to do, but you've got to visualize a figure 8, and that's 2 overlapping circles, side by side, or they can be vertically, or they can be diagonally. They can be overlapping from 12 to 6, from 3 to 9, from 2 to 8, from 10 to 4. The important thing is, though, is to follow that pattern. Now, if I make a circle with my lead leg, there's the beginning of that figure 8. If I come around with this side, they overlap. Now, you've got to understand, when I speak of a circle, it doesn't mean that I have to actually complete 360 degrees that constitutes a circle. That's not the important thing. If I complete 290 degrees, okay, then that constitutes the circle because we still see the ghost image. That's what we call a circle. All right? So if you see this overlapping here, here's the other circle. So basically you have your 2 figure 8s in here. With the help of Ernie, I'm going to show you how this figure 8 can be applied. If he comes through, there's a double sweep. That's what the figure 8 takes. Now, without me showing you, again, you can imagine what my hands can do at this point. But that figure 8 occupied his feet. Now, if he comes back in, and my sweep is a little too strong, and he does go down on the first shot, if he comes around to grab me, to hook me, my second circle now can sweep and keep him open and keep that away from me. Now, if I reverse my sweeps and I begin to do my overlapping figure 8s, you can imagine what can be used on the ground. All right, I want to work on zigzagging, and zigzagging is exactly what it implies. It's off-angling with your foot maneuvers. If I start from a neutral bow, it's no more than a crossover. But rather than stepping out with a step through or going off at the same angle, you zigzag back. And it's no more of a way of traveling in this position. With the help of Ernie, I'll show you how this can be applied. We can zigzag to the left first, which shoots him up, and then to the right. And if I take one more zigzag to the other side, right, I have a stop at this point, and again, you can imagine what I can do from here. The last maneuver I'm going to cover is called broken rhythm. Now, it's not a foot maneuver per se, but broken rhythm is used in all basics. And it's a way of, you might say, stuttering motion. And as you stutter motion, your opponent doesn't really quite know what you're up to. For instance, if we're moving together and I start slow and I kind of ease myself into it, but then I begin to stutter my stances. He doesn't know if I'm going to step through or if I'm going to go back or what I'm going to do. But it keeps him occupied so that if I do make a commitment, he doesn't know when that commitment is to be made. If you watch it, even with my hands, you never quite know when it's going to happen, but then until it's on top of you. Thank you, Ernie. Now, again, you can use this in any foot maneuver. I would begin in a neutral. It's part of a step and then a drag, and then a push drag maybe, or a drag step, and then a push drag in reverse. A partial, a halfway step through, and then a fake, and then back forward again. Part of a switch, but not quite. Part of a crossover, but then you changed your mind and you came back. Now, I'm talking about this now because we're going to be employing this later on throughout the tapes. So learn it, analyze it, see what I was doing. If you have to slow your tape down to pick it up, then do it. Good. In conclusion, your foot maneuvers, as I've shown, can be used from getting you from one target to another, from one point to the other, but I've also showed that they can be used as weapons. Remember this. If you're in a situation where your hands are injured, or for some reason they're tied up where you can't use your hands, you may have to rely upon your foot maneuvers. I'll give you an example, and you see at home some of them that I'm going to use.